Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we have something slightly new and different for you. We are going to be covering a subscribers games. So the channel doesn't have a Patreon or a shop or merchandise or any of those things, but recently the subscriber reached out to us and asked if we might be interested in covering their games now that they've joined the online league where we play as well. This sounds very interesting and I'm quite excited to show you in this first game even why opening principles are so important. So let's get into it. Alright, so let's get into the game then. White opened the game with d4, black went knight f6, white went c4, and here we see the small slight variation coming out already on move 2, where black decides to go d6. So this could still represent a move order nuance for the King's Indian defense, for instance, where they can fianchetto their bishop and decide to castle, and then they would have essentially just transposed into the King's Indian defense. But black has a few other plans in store instead. White continued very natural, knight c3, and at this point, black decided to play knight bd7. This is not a move that I myself know very well, so I had to look this up a tiny bit to see what's going on, but an old Indian is really just a very standard and safe way for black to start developing a way to break in the center. So we're not going to play a King's Indian defense with the bishop on g7, but we might put the bishop on e7, for instance, after playing something like e5 and breaking in the center as well. In this position, white says, thank you very much, I shall have that center. Very, very standard play, and also takes up a nice space advantage for white. And black now brings in their own stake in the center, coming in with e5. In this case now, the ball's back in white's court. They have to decide, do they take the pawn, do they push, maybe they develop and defend. I myself have a general principle where I know that if I play d5 and it doesn't kick a knight, then I don't play it, because it's better then to rather develop and take back if black takes, because they ideally also maybe want to keep their e-pawn if they possibly could. However, I also have to admit that recently in one of my games, d5 was the best move even though it didn't kick a knight, so I guess sometimes even principles fail a little bit, but thankfully opening principles for the most part do stay very safe, as we will see. So white decided not to take and not to develop to defend, but instead to push. A very natural decision. I think many of us, especially as we start to learn about chess, prefer not to keep tension on the board. So if you don't want to take, then you're just going to push the pawn out of the way so that there is no more tension, and now the center of the board is slightly locked. In this case, black might eventually play for the standard King's Indian break of f5, for instance, or they might come with c6 and b5 at some other point to try and get at the center if they don't want to play on the flank. And actually, in fact, what black did decide to immediately put a question to the center by not going knight c5, which is very natural looking, or playing bishop e7 or something. They actually just played c6 right away and asked white, wouldn't you potentially want to take here and allow me to get a little bit more control in the center and also get my light squares back. Black, however, did not, oh, sorry, white did not take, however, they decided to just develop the pieces again, and this again looks very similar to what I would say is a King's Indian defense setup. White's got the space advantage, their bishop's going to be a little bit silly, they have to bring their knight out somewhere, and then they can probably castle, potentially they can break with f4 at some point. And after this, black also is just developing, getting into castle. And here, after white plays knight ge2, now you see that indeed they do have this f4 break. I myself quite like fianchettoing and then playing knight ge2 as well, because it gives you a similar break. And this white square bishop is also looking at your e4 pawn, but it is also eyeing the long diagonal. So a similar idea, not going with knight f3, but coming in with knight ge2 so that you can push that f4 break when you want to. In this situation, then, there's really kind of two main ideas here. Black can castle, which is a safe move. Black can jump their knight out to knight to c5, potentially look to pick up the bishop pair if they were looking to maybe have a long-term advantage. Although in the short term, obviously, this light square bishop isn't really doing that much just yet. In this position, then, black did decide they might want to take that bishop. And here, white has a choice. Is it better to just castle and let the bishop fall and take back with the queen? Well, in this pawn structure, yes, actually, I think probably the knight is a little bit more valuable than the bishop if the center of the board stays closed. However, you don't have to let your bishop pair get snapped up immediately. This knight is also going to be a little bit in trouble after you get in a move like b4, for instance, that you can kick away from the square. So I think correctly white decided to just play bishop c2 and just get their bishop a little bit safe. They still have the choice of what they want to do with it later on. And this knight, although it's in a really nice square, is probably going to be a little bit in trouble after b4 comes in, because these squares are not available to it. So it'll have to jump back from whence it came, basically. So here black sees this threat, I think, and they come in with a5. So now, in a Nimzo Indian structure, I a lot of the time like to play a5 first, before I put my knight on c5, because that way, as soon as I jump it, b4 can't be played because I will take. In this case, black obviously had the threat of taking the bishop immediately. So for instance, in this position, they could have picked up the bishop here and said, like, fair enough, the game is closed, but I'm going to castle, maybe I'm going to jump my knight somewhere, and then I'm going to break. And as the game opens up, my two bishops are going to be felt. Alright, so white says, thank you very much, I'm going to keep my bishop for now. And in this position, black played that a5 move, keeping the knight on the nice c5, oopsie, keeping the knight on the nice c4 outpost. And here probably the most natural move for white would just be to castle, king safety, opening principles. However, instead they saw a tactic, a attacking idea they really wanted to do, and they played bishop a4. Now bishop f4 isn't losing by any chance, although it does give up white's opening advantage, so the engine would say black is slightly better here. But there's a few things. Number one, we unfortunately didn't castle. Number two, our light square bishop has now moved 3 times, and our queen and other bishops still haven't moved. And also we have let go of our e4 pawn, which could be a little bit troublesome, because this pawn, obviously center pawn, could be quite valuable. Now the idea that white has here, which is quite nice in itself, is that after they take this pawn here, black can't take back, because then they would fork the queen and the rook. Ach, the king and the rook, apologies. So the attacking gear looks quite nice, but I'm not sure if it's worth it quite in this position. Also, we're attacking quite fast. We haven't quite finished development or got our king to safety. So in this position, there's a few ways that we could go. Probably the best way would be is just to take that center pawn, right? And this is indeed what black decided to do. And I also have to say I like the decision to take with the f knight. So in this case, you can obviously take with your c knight as well, but having two knights like this versus having two knights like this, obviously the two knights on the fourth and fifth rank, they're a little bit in danger. They can get kicked around by pawns, for instance, but they're also a lot more aggressive. They're getting into contact with the opponent's pieces, they're putting questions to your opponent. And if you do the other way around, then also you don't have your break ready, you don't have your dark square bishop coming out. So I do like the fact that we're taking with the F knight, sorry. Although after knight takes back, it actually doesn't really matter that much, because if you take that knight now, like black decided to do, then either knight would have been decided. We've just transposed. And so in this position now, black has won a pawn. Their bishop, their knight is a little bit, let's say, weak. A little bit in danger potentially on e4. Not currently attacked, but not defended at all. So I would expect something like f5, maybe breaking there to defend it. And obviously white always has to be careful for playing something like f3, because it opens up the diagonal to the king. So in this position, white went ahead with their own attacking plan. They took that pawn, and now if black made the mistake of taking back, then white would take, and they would pick up the exchange. The king would probably not move out of the way. You'd probably just end up developing your light square bishop. Thank you for the rook. Thank you for the bishop. And in this case, the game is still okay. We're not doing incredibly badly, but probably it's not the best, right? Black has lost their exchange, their kind of pawn structure and piece development don't make too much sense. They have a weak square on d5, so this would be not the best way for black to go. So actually, after that pawn was taken, black played the best move, probably the only good move here, which is just to castle the king, because the threat is double. You could also take the pawn, but you could also just push the pawn, and then you would still unveil this attack. You'd also hit the queen, so very, very dangerous either way. And black, I think, correctly judged that they really need to get their king out of there. All right, so we got our king out of the way. White says fair enough, I'll pick up that pawn then. Takes here and helps black develop a little bit. So this long diagonal might become useful for black later on. They also now have their king in safety. They have developed their minor pieces. The only piece still need to move is the queen, and then the rooks are also connected. And in this position now, white obviously needs to start moving on their own development as well. They need to castle, they need to get the minor piece and the queen off the back rank. So they do castle correctly, I think. And here black continues with, in this position, which I'm not so sure would have been my first idea, they do play f5. Um, this actually now, again, I mean, chess is all about patterns. If I look at this f5 break in this position, it feels a little bit reminiscent of a Sveshnikov because of this d6, e5 pawn structure, the weakness on d5, and f5 being a supported break that you always want to try and get in the Sveshnikov. This position feels a little bit similar to that, and in that case, I understand f5 because I can see how you're trying to push your advantage of your pawn majority on the king side, and also as you push, you make more space and you get more mobility for your pieces behind the pawns to launch an attack on the king or to create complications before you swap focus and also create complications on the queen side. So, not the first move I would have gone with, but as soon as it's on the board, I see a kind of vaguely recognizable structure. So it makes sense to me in that case. So here in this situation, probably black's best move would be something like bishop c2, because currently that bishop is not really doing that much. It's out on the side of the board. You probably want to get it back in. Maybe you could have started off with something like putting your dark square bishop out. I'm not sure, maybe here, because you can expect these pawns are going to start rolling in a little bit. You could also maybe consider moving out your king somewhere, or your queen, but I'm not sure where you would put your queen just yet. So I quite like the idea of moving the bishops first. Or I guess what you could have done is you could have put your knight out as well. For instance, if you play a knight out here and black takes, this looks not the worst. You could also take with your f-pawn, which does open up your king's dark square diagonal and does give black kind of potential passer, but it also means that your rook is immediately active on the f-file, but probably not the best. You have the same idea on the c3 square side, but I like this slightly less because you get doubled pawns, which is just another weakness to deal with, and black has no specific problems with their kingside push. They could put a bishop or a rook or something over here, maybe, probably a bishop I would be best, and just keep your isolated pawns in their sights and try to maybe break them down long term. However, in this position, white decided that they really don't like this aggressive knight in the front, and they're going to try to get rid of it, so they're going to play f3. And so f3, as the wise Feingold would ever say, always say, don't play f3, don't play f6. The key reason is because you open up a diagonal to your king, one that is not easily closed off because it's open towards the center of the board, and that's normally where pawns are getting traded off, and piece play comes into the game. So indeed, in this position, if black would jump their knight away, let's say you jump it to c5, hitting that bishop, this position is okay to play. White can move their bishop out of the way, maybe here, and in this case, the game would continue. However, because you've opened up that diagonal, black has a better move that takes advantage of it in between, um, because your king is open. So queen b6, and unfortunately white now cannot take the knight because they have to move the king. You cannot block because the rook would hang, so it's almost forced you have to move out of the way. However, in this case now, black sees a nice little pattern. They can jump in and fork your queen and your king, and after you take with the rook, they take with the queen, and they've won the exchange, and they've won the rook next to your king. So your king is a little bit weak right now. Not falling just yet, but in this position, things are looking quite dire. Currently, black doesn't have more than two pieces directly attacking. However, white doesn't have a lot of pieces directly defending either. Unfortunately, white's pieces are mostly sitting on the queen side, undeveloped or potentially not kind of looking at the action directly. So in this position, it's hard to really suggest a strong move for white, but clearly you have to get rid of that queen. So any way that you could, for instance, trade off that queen might be acceptable. I'm not sure exactly how we want to do that because you can't move the queen anywhere here because the knight would hang or the queen would hang. Maybe you have to jump the knight out first. You also can't hit that dark queen with your bishop just yet. So maybe you have to move your bishop and then move your queen out, or you have to move your knight out and then your queen in. But in some way, you probably need to push that queen away from your king and try and get some control back on your side of the board. So white did continue looking for ways to do that. So bishop d2, and here though, e4 and black is starting to crash through. So black is now using those Sveshnikov-esque pawns, coming at the king's side, correctly seeing that they can, instead of taking space, they can actually just start breaking down the pawn structure around your king. That light square bishop that we saw earlier is starting to become a little bit more active if those pawns start getting traded off. So definitely the position is looking more and more in favor for black and the development that they've achieved throughout this game so far. So in this position, I think basically one of the last moves was played where white had a chance to maybe do something a little bit more active. Really what we have to do is we have to get rid of this queen right now. So any queen move I think here or here is perfectly fine. Moving the bishop back is perfectly fine. So maybe this is okay. Maybe this is okay. Oh, sorry. Maybe this is okay. Maybe the bishop back is okay. Anything like this to try and get rid of that queen might be okay. Although when I say okay, probably the position is quite rough for white already. But they decided that actually they need to bring their light square bishop back first, and this is unfortunately just a little bit too slow. So this light square bishop keeps that pawn safe for them. Potentially they want to move it and look back at that knight or back at that f1 square. But here, unfortunately, black just has a really pretty way to finish off the game. They take, threatening mate on g2, and if you were to go queen g2, they could still take, and then they could take with the pawn. If you were to play knight a4 to defend it from the back, they could still take and take with the bishop. And in the game, what was played was white taking, and then black finishes off bishop f3 with a very pretty corner mate. And again, a look at how activity and peace, like peace play around the king can get so dangerous so quickly. And so this was a very nice miniature for black. Congratulations, winning in under 20 moves. As far as I understand, that's what you call a miniature. From my perspective, I saw why principles are so important. I really liked the idea that white had to take on c6 and to try and complicate matters there, but I can see how that was unfortunately just a little bit too fast. And although they still had a situation where things were not too bad right after that, just not getting the king to safety fast enough was probably where I started to see things starting to crumble a little bit. So in this position, um, I don't think playing bishop a4 was absolutely the best move. The idea is nice, but taking into consideration that we haven't got our king safe, we haven't got development finished, and we undefend our e-pawn, unfortunately, probably at this point is not the best move to do it. And then in this case, after we continue, I think we really just need to be aware of the imminent danger that black's pieces are posing us. Black's dark bishop isn't super active, but black is the only one with pawns in the center. Black has an aggressive knight. The light square bishop is active. The queen can come out quickly. And just a little bit of how do I say it? Just an oversight, just missing a little bit of awareness here to see that as soon as we open up that diagonal, this is a classic diagonal that black can take advantage of. With either the dark square bishop from its natural square or the queen from its natural square coming in onto that diagonal, which might check your king depending on if it's still on the square where it was after castling. So again, congratulations to Kai mate. Really nice game for them to finish off. Pretty little mate in the corner. I really like this, by the way. It's a nice little one to mate with a minor piece instead of the queen. And yeah, I'm hoping to see more interesting games as we go along. All right, and that's it. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you very much for tuning in. As said, this is kind of not something that we've done before. It's not an official offering we have or anything on the channel, but it's really enjoyable, and I'm really excited to try something new. If you want to have your own games recap like this, please drop a comment below. Let me know. We can have that discussion. I'm open to it. I only have that much free time currently since I have a newborn, but I'm always open to looking at some ideas, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye bye.